Mark and I had always been a solid couple. Married for 6 years, partners in everything. Our life was comfortable, built on routine and mutual support. He was ambitious, driven, always pushing himself at work, and I admired that about him. But lately things had changed. He was drowning in stress, obsessed with an upcoming promotion that could transform our lives. Late nights, constant anxiety, and an unshakable fear that he wasn't good enough filled our home like a silent storm. His company had been restructuring, and the competition for the role was fierce. Mark was qualified, more than qualified, but so were others. His boss, Mr. Carter, had the final say. A man of power, sharp instincts, and unreadable expressions, Carter was known for his fairness but also for making unpredictable choices. Mark respected him, even feared him a little. We attended an office party a few weeks ago, where I finally met the man my husband talked about so much. Carter was tall, confident, his presence commanding. When he greeted me, his handshake lingered just a second longer than necessary. His eyes held mine with an intensity that sent an unexpected shiver through me. We talked briefly, nothing inappropriate, yet something about the way he spoke made me feel noticed in a way I hadn't in years. It was harmless, or so I told myself. As Mark's stress deepened, I felt powerless watching him unravel. He wasn't sleeping well, barely eating. He doubted himself, and no matter how much I reassured him, it wasn't enough. One night, he sat at the dining table, head in his hands. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice hollow. "You deserve this promotion," I said, squeezing his shoulder. "You've worked harder than anyone." "But Carter, he doesn't give things away. What if he thinks I'm not the right fit?" A strange thought slipped into my mind, uninvited. Carter had noticed me that night. He was a man used to getting what he wanted. What if I could use that? It was a fleeting idea, absurd at first, but it stayed. I hated seeing Mark like this. He had given everything to this job, and if he lost the promotion now, it would break him. I wasn't the type to sit back and watch that happen. A few days later, I found an opportunity. Carter was attending a networking event, something casual where spouses weren't expected but could still show up. It wasn't planned. I convinced myself of that. But when I arrived, I made sure he saw me. His lips curled into the smallest smirk, as if he already knew why I was there. "Mrs. Daniels," he greeted, his voice smooth. "Didn't expect to see you here." I smiled, feigning innocence. "Just thought I'd stop by." His gaze flickered over me, assessing. Amusement danced in his eyes, but he said nothing more. Yet in that moment I knew, the door was open. And I had just stepped inside that I told myself it was just a conversation, nothing more. A harmless way to make sure Carter saw Mark in the best light. But the way he looked at me that night at the event stayed with me, lingering in my thoughts longer than it should have. Mark was spiraling, and no amount of encouragement seemed to help. If there was a way to ease his burden, shouldn't I take it? The next day I sent Carter a message. A polite, calculated request, asking if we could meet to discuss Mark's contributions to the company. He responded almost immediately. "Lunch. Tomorrow. My office." I stared at the message, heart pounding. There was nothing inappropriate about it, yet it felt like I was crossing some invisible line. I didn't tell Mark. The next afternoon I walked into Carter's office, dressed carefully. Not too obvious but intentional. He leaned back in his chair, watching me with an unreadable expression. "So," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "you wanted to talk about your husband's future?" I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Mark has worked hard. He deserves this promotion." Carter tilted his head slightly. "You don't need to convince me. I've been watching him for years." Relief washed over me. Maybe this was easier than I thought. "Then you know he's the right choice." His lips curved into a slow smile. "I also know there are other factors. Business is never just about hard work." Something in his tone sent a spark of unease through me. His gaze lingered, not inappropriate but deliberate. He knew exactly why I was here. I admire your dedication, he continued, standing and walking around the desk. Mark is a lucky man. He was close now, his presence overwhelming. I should have ended the conversation, thanked him and left. But I didn't move. You came here thinking you could persuade me, he said, his voice low. But the truth is, I had already made my decision. My breath caught. Then why agree to meet? His smile deepened. Curiosity. There was a challenge in his eyes, an unspoken invitation. He wasn't making any promises, but I understood what he was offering. This was a test, one I hadn't realized I was already failing. I left his office with my mind in turmoil. He hadn't touched me, hadn't said anything explicit, yet the shift between us was undeniable. I felt exhilarated, ashamed, but above all powerful. That night, I lay beside Mark, listening to his slow, steady breaths. He had no idea what I was contemplating, what doors had been opened. He still believed his fate rested on his own merit. But I knew better. And I wasn't sure if I had the strength to close those doors before it was too late. I told myself I wouldn't go back. That I had what I needed. Assurance that Mark was being considered. But that wasn't the real reason I kept thinking about Carter. It wasn't just about the promotion anymore. It was about the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel like I was the one in control when, deep down, I knew I wasn't. Days passed, and Mark remained oblivious to the war raging inside me. He was still anxious, still doubting himself, still drowning in the uncertainty of his future. And I knew that with one decision I could change everything. Carter didn't reach out, but he didn't have to. I knew where to find him. I showed up at his office again, this time without pretense. When I walked in, he didn't look surprised. He simply leaned back in his chair, studying me like he had been expecting this moment. "You're back," he said, his voice calm, controlled. I didn't answer right away. My heart pounded in my chest, but I refused to let it show. Instead, I walked toward him, closing the distance, making the choice I had already made long before stepping into the room. There were no more words after that, only the sound of my own heartbeat drowning out everything else. It was fast, reckless, inevitable. The weight of guilt barely touched me in those moments. I had convinced myself that this was necessary, that I was securing Mark's future, that it would all be worth it in the end. When it was over, I expected to feel something: regret, disgust, shame. But all I felt was an eerie calm. Carter straightened his tie. His expression unreadable again, as if nothing had happened. "Your husband will be fine," he said simply, a quiet promise that held more weight than anything else he had ever said. I left without responding, stepping into the cool evening air, trying to steady my breath. My hands trembled, but not from fear. It was power. It was control. And yet, a whisper of doubt curled around the edges of my mind. That night, Mark came home with an unexpected lightness in his step. "I think things are looking up," he said. "Carter called me in today. He was different." I forced a smile, ignoring the sick feeling in my stomach. "What did he say?" "Nothing definite, but I think I have a real shot now." His excitement should have reassured me, but instead it made everything worse. He still believed this was about his hard work. He still thought this was his achievement alone. I kissed him, murmuring that I was proud of him, but inside I was unraveling. I had done what I thought was necessary, but now that it was done, I couldn't shake the question lingering in the back of my mind. Had Carter truly changed his decision because of me? Or had Mark always been the right choice, and I had crossed a line for nothing? Mark got the promotion. The official announcement came a week later, and he was overjoyed. He pulled me into his arms, kissed me like he hadn't in years, and thanked me for always believing in him. I smiled, told him I was proud, played the part of the supportive wife. But inside I was suffocating. Carter never contacted me again. No messages, no calls, nothing. It was as if that night had never happened. I should have felt relieved, but the silence only made it worse. Had I really done this for Mark, or had I let something inside me take control? I didn't know anymore. Mark's new position came with late hours and constant meetings. I should have been happy for him, but every time I looked at him, the guilt clawed at my chest. He had no idea what I had done. He still believed in the illusion that his promotion was earned through his own merit. I wanted to believe it too. Then one night he came home tense, his usual excitement gone. "Something weird happened today," he said, loosening his tie. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Carter made a comment. He asked if I knew how lucky I was to have you." Mark chuckled, but there was something forced about it. It was strange. Almost like he was implying something. A chill ran down my spine. Forced a laugh. Maybe he just meant I'm supportive. Maybe. Mark hesitated. But then I heard something else. Some of the guys were joking about Carter and how he treats certain women. Someone even said he has a way of testing loyalty. My hands felt cold. "You don't believe that, do you?" Mark studied me for a long moment, and for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. "I don't know. But it's been bothering me." I turned away, pretending to tidy the kitchen just to avoid his gaze. "People gossip," I said lightly. "You earned this, Mark. Don't let rumors ruin it." He didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "You'd tell me if something happened, right?" I felt my world tilting, my carefully built lies cracking beneath me. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to unload the weight crushing me, but I knew the moment the truth left my lips, everything we had would be destroyed. So I did what I had done from the beginning. I lied. Course. "There's nothing to tell." Mark nodded, but something had shifted between us. I saw it in the way he looked at me now, in the way his trust wavered just slightly. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trapped in a silence heavier than any words. I had gotten what I wanted. Mark had his promotion. We had our future. But at what cost? And how long before the truth found its way to the surface?